Welcome to Founding Chronicles. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Today, we explore a haunting moment from Pennsylvania history. The 1914 school photo that showed a teacher who had already died. The year was 1914, and the small town of Glenridge, Pennsylvania, lay tucked between rolling hills and dense forests, a place where everyone knew everyone else, and the rhythm of life moved slowly, measured by the seasons and the bells of the local church. The town was a collection of brick buildings and wooden homes, smoke curling from chimneys in the chill of early autumn, children running barefoot down dusty streets, laughing and calling to one another. Life was simple, predictable, and for the most part, safe. Yet, in this quiet corner of America, something happened that would leave the town whispering in disbelief for years to come. The Glenridge School stood at the heart of the town, a red brick building with tall windows and a bell tower that rang every morning to summon the children from their homes. It was a place of learning, of discipline, and of routine, where young minds were shaped by the patience and guidance of dedicated teachers. Among them was Miss Margaret Whitmore, a woman whose presence was as gentle as it was firm. She was in her early 30s, with dark hair always neatly pinned back, eyes that seemed to see everything, and a voice that carried authority without harshness. She had come to Glenridge 5 years earlier, taking over after the previous teacher. Retired, and in that short time, she had become a fixture in the lives of the townspeople. Parents trusted her. Children admired her. Even the gruff men of the town, who spent their days in the fields or the factory, respected the way she managed her classroom. Miss Whitmore was not just a teacher. She was a guardian of childhood, a guide in a world that could sometimes be unkind. Her dedication was known by all, and on the morning of October 12, 1914, the townspeople expected to see her as she had been every day for years, standing in the doorway of her classroom, ready to welcome her students with a smile. It was the day scheduled for the annual school photograph, an event the townspeople looked forward to. Families would dress their children in their finest clothes, stiff collars and polished shoes, hair combed carefully into neat styles. Mothers would fuss over their children, smoothing down stray strands of hair, while fathers stood by silently, proud yet self-conscious. It was a tradition meant to capture the innocence and pride of childhood, a moment frozen in time for families to cherish. Photographers from the neighboring town of Carlisle had come with their large cameras, tripods, and glass plate negatives. Setting up in the school gymnasium, with a light from the tall windows, could illuminate the faces of the children and their beloved teacher. On the morning of the photo, however, something strange had already begun to unsettle the small town. Miss Whitmore had not been seen for several days, and a low murmur of concern had started to circulate. Rumors whispered in the market, in the church pews, and along the streets. She was ill, some said. Others worried that something more serious had happened. Yet no one had confirmed anything. And so, in a mixture of hope and obligation, the photograph proceeded as planned. The children lined up in rows, girls in their frilly dresses and boys in knee-length trousers, standing as still as possible under the stern gaze of the photographer. Parents adjusted collars and held nervous hands over their children's shoulders, while the teacher's usual presence was notably absent. In place of Miss Whitmore, a young substitute had been asked to stand at the front, ensuring the arrangement seemed complete. Yet when the photograph was developed, what emerged on the glass plate would shock Glenridge to its very core. There she was, Margaret Whitmore. Not as she appeared in life, not as the people of Glenridge remembered her walking down the streets or teaching in the classroom, but there she was, seated in the center of the photograph, eyes calm and steady, face composed, and body perfectly poised as if nothing had ever changed. Only one thing was different. Margaret Whitmore had been dead for nearly a week. The townspeople could not understand it. How had she appeared in the photograph if she was no longer among the living? How could the camera have captured her presence when she was already gone? The revelation spread quickly. Parents gasped when they saw the photograph displayed in the school hallway. Children whispered in fear and confusion, unable to reconcile the friendly face of their teacher with the somber reality they had been told. The town gathered in hushed groups, questioning, speculating, and, in some cases, trembling at the idea that the image might be more than just a photograph, that perhaps something supernatural had touched their lives in that quiet corner of Pennsylvania. Historians later speculated about the timing of the photograph, the development of the glass plate negatives, and the practices of early 20th century photography. Some suggested that Miss Whitmore had been photographed days earlier, and her image had been composited with the current class using a technique that, for the time, was astonishingly precise. Others whispered of spirits and lingering souls, insisting that the teacher had come back to ensure the memory of her classroom remained intact, that the children knew she had not abandoned them, even in death. For the families of Glenridge, however, the explanation mattered less than the feeling. Cold, inexplicable chill that ran down their spines when they gazed at the photograph and realized that their teacher, so full of life and warmth just days before, had somehow reached beyond the veil of mortality to sit once more among her students. So the story of the 1914 school photograph became a legend in Pennsylvania, a tale passed down from generation to generation. Visitors would come to the small town just to see the faded glass plate negative, to study the faces of the children, and the serene presence of Miss Whitmore, forever captured in that singular, haunting moment. It was a photograph that defied logic, a moment frozen in time that neither life nor death could fully claim. Even decades later, those who saw the photograph would describe it with the same mixture of awe and fear, recounting the expression in Miss Whitmore's eyes, the subtle tilt of her head, and the calm authority that seemed to radiate from beyond the grave. For the people of Glenridge, it was more than a photograph. It was a reminder that life was fragile, fleeting, and sometimes touched by mysteries far greater than human understanding. The days following the photograph were filled with a tension Glenridge had never known. The town, usually filled with the sound of children laughing and the low hum of daily work, became a place of quiet unease. Whispers traveled through the streets, drifting over fences and lingering in doorways. Every mention of Miss Whitmore's name carried a weight that seemed heavier than life itself, and parents found themselves pausing mid-sentence, remembering the serene smile that now stared out from the photograph in the school hallway. For the children, the shock was deeper than any adult could anticipate. 11-year-old Clara Thompson, who had adored Miss Whitmore, found herself unable to look at the photograph without a shiver running down her spine. Clara's small fingers would trace the faint outline of the teacher's figure as though she could feel the warmth that no longer existed. Night after night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the person who had read her stories, corrected her sums, and scolded her gently when she misbehaved could be smiling at her from beyond the grave. Her younger brother, Samuel, whispered to her that maybe Miss Whitmore had come back to see them one last time, and in that innocent thought, Clara found a mixture of comfort and dread that left her sleepless. Parents tried to shield their children from the truth, but reality could not be hidden for long. Mr. Thompson, Clara's father, a man of stern demeanor and simple logic, argued with the other fathers at the general store. It must have been some trick of the photographer, he insisted, running his hands over the coarse fabric of his work shirt. Those new glass plate techniques can do strange things. It's nothing more than a clever illusion. Yet even as he spoke, a chill ran up his spine. He had seen the photograph himself, and the way Miss Whitmore's eyes seemed to follow the children, calm and knowing, defied explanation. The town council convened in the small meeting hall where the mayor, a heavy-set man with a habit of puffing nervously on his pipe, attempted to restore a sense of order. "We must remain rational," he said, voice echoing off the wooden walls. "Miss Whitmore was a remarkable woman, but she is gone. We cannot let superstition dictate our lives." Yet even he could not escape the unease. Teachers and townspeople alike had recounted stories, tiny, unsettling details that seemed trivial at first, but together painted a picture too strange to ignore. Some remembered glimpsing Miss Whitmore's shadow in the schoolhouse long after she had fallen ill. Others spoke of the soft sound of her footsteps in empty hallways, or the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the classroom long after she had left Dot. As the days passed, the photograph itself became a source of both fascination and dread. It was displayed prominently in the school, a reminder of the annual event that had been meant to celebrate youth and learning. Visitors came from neighboring towns, some with skeptical eyes, others with a fascination that bordered on reverence. They would study the faces of the children and the serene figure of Miss Whitmore, pointing out details that made the hair on the back of their necks stand on end, the tilt of her head, the placement of her hands, the calm certainty in her eyes, that seemed to transcend the boundaries of life itself. A few days after the photograph was taken, Dr. Henry Caldwell, the town physician, was called to investigate. He was a man of science, a rational mind in a town often given to superstition. Dr. Caldwell had cared for Miss Whitmore during her illness, noting the sudden fever that had gripped her, the cough that rattled through her chest, and the pallor that had taken over her once vibrant face. He had pronounced her death after a brief but intense illness, a simple case of pneumonia that had spread quickly in the chill of early autumn. Yet standing before the photograph, he found himself unsettled. The image was so vivid, so real, that for a moment he could almost believe she was alive. Determined to uncover the truth, Dr. Caldwell began a meticulous investigation. He spoke with the photographer, Mr. Elias Barrett, a meticulous man known for his attention to detail and insistence on technical perfection. Barrett explained that the photograph had been scheduled and composed days in advance, that Miss Whitmore had indeed been present during preliminary arrangements, and that the glass plates had been carefully prepared for exposure. Barrett's voice was calm, but there was a tension in his hands as he adjusted his spectacles. "It was impossible," he said quietly. "The plates were exposed after her passing. She should not have appeared in the image. There is no explanation, none, that I can offer." Word of Dr. Caldwell's inquiry spread quickly, and soon the town was abuzz with speculation. Some insisted that the photograph was evidence of a miracle, a sign that Miss Whitmore's spirit had returned to bless her students one final time. Others whispered darker tales, suggesting that the boundaries between life and death were not as fixed as they believed, that perhaps something had lingered in the schoolhouse, watching, waiting, ensuring that the children would never forget. Her presence died in the weeks that followed. The town struggled to find a sense of normalcy. Classes continued, though the atmosphere was forever altered. The children, once carefree and boisterous, now carried a weight of awareness they could not explain. They glanced at the empty desk at the front of the classroom, imagining Miss Whitmore's voice guiding them through lessons, her hand poised to correct a misstep, her calm eyes watching over their every move. Even the substitute teachers found themselves unnerved, sensing an invisible presence that seemed to linger just out of sight. Gentle yet insistently real. Families began recounting personal memories of Miss Whitmore in ways they never had before. They spoke of her kindness, her sharp intellect, her unwavering patience. Stories emerged of small, unnoticed acts of care, notes left in desks, lessons tailored to struggling students, comforting words for those who were sad or lonely. Each memory seemed to reinforce the impossibility of the photograph. How could someone so deeply woven into the fabric of the town, so intimately present in daily life, appear in a photograph after death? Yet, as the weeks turned to months, the photograph remained. It was carefully preserved, encased in glass, and displayed as both a testament to a teacher's enduring presence and a source of quiet dread. Visitors would study it, scholars would speculate, and the people of Glenridge would continue to pass down the story, each retelling adding layers of emotion, awe, and mystery. For the children who had been in the photograph, the memory never faded. They would look back on their childhood with a mixture of nostalgia and fear, recalling the warm, firm presence of Miss Whitmore and the haunting image that had captured her beyond the grave. It became a lesson of its own, a reminder that life was fleeting, that those we love could be taken from us in an instant, and that sometimes the mysteries of the world were far beyond human understanding. And in the quiet moments, when the young wind rustled through the trees around Glenridge, and the sun cast long shadows across the red brick schoolhouse, some claimed they could still feel Miss Whitmore's presence, a reassuring warmth in the classroom, a calm guidance in their thoughts, a silent promise that though she had departed from this world, she remained forever in the hearts and memories of those she had taught. The months that followed the appearance of the photograph were marked by a strange, unspoken tension in Glenridge. Life moved forward, as it always does, but the town was never quite the same. Children laughed and played, but there was a new, quiet edge to their voices, a sense of wonder mixed with unease. Adults went about their work, but behind their smiles lingered a whispered question that none dared to ask aloud. How had Miss Whitmore appeared in the photograph after she had already passed? For some, the answer was simple. It was a trick of photography. But the more they tried to rationalize, the more impossible it seemed. Mr. Elias Barrett, the photographer, became a reluctant figure of scrutiny. Scholars and curious townspeople asked him repeatedly about the technique, about exposure, times and plate development, but Barrett could only repeat what he had said before. It was impossible. She should not have been there. His own hands trembled as he spoke, betraying a doubt that even he could not contain. It was during one cold December afternoon, as snow began to blanket the streets of Glenridge, that the story took on a deeper, more personal dimension. Clara Thompson, now 13, returned to the schoolhouse alone, drawn by a mixture of nostalgia and longing. She walked slowly up the worn steps, feeling the familiar creak beneath her feet. Inside, the gymnasium was empty, the photograph hanging quietly in its frame, catching the low light from the frost-covered windows. Clara stood before it, her small hands brushing lightly against the glass. She felt a warmth, subtle and almost imperceptible, emanating from Miss Whitmore's image. In that moment, Clara recalled every detail of the teacher she had loved so dearly. The gentle correction of a mispronounced word, the patient explanations of arithmetic problems, the quiet encouragement during a difficult reading assignment. And then, almost as if the memory itself had conjured a presence, she felt it, a faint brush of air, a whisper of perfume long gone, a sensation that someone unseen was standing behind her, watching over her with care. Her heart pounded, and yet she felt no fear. It was comfort, reassurance, and longing all at once. News of such experiences began to spread quietly among the children who had been in the photograph. Samuel Thompson admitted to his friends that he sometimes felt Miss Whitmore's hand guiding him during his lessons at home, helping him understand problems that otherwise seemed impossible. Others reported faint whispers in empty hallways, shadows that seemed to follow them, a warmth in the classroom when the cold wind blew through the broken windows. Adults dismissed these as the imaginings of young minds, but the consistency and intensity of the experiences could not be ignored. Dr. Henry Caldwell, intrigued and disturbed, decided to investigate further. He interviewed families, questioned children, and even spent nights in the schoolhouse alone, observing for any unusual phenomena. One evening, as the last light of the day faded and the shadows stretched long across the wooden floor, Dr. Caldwell recorded a faint, rhythmic tapping sound coming from the direction of the photograph. He approached slowly, heart racing, only to find nothing physically present, no mechanism, no person, no trick of the building. And yet the sound persisted, soft and deliberate, like a quiet heartbeat echoing through time. Scholars from neighboring towns began to arrive, drawn by the growing legend. They examined the glass plate negatives, studied the techniques of early photography, and debated endlessly in hushed tones. Some proposed that it was a case of double exposure. Others suggested a long exposure illusion, but none could reconcile the technical explanations with the timing of Miss Whitmore's death. For many, the photograph became more than just an image. It became a symbol of the delicate boundary between life and death, a challenge to the limits of human understanding. Meanwhile, the children's lives unfolded under the watchful gaze of their missing teacher. Clara and Samuel, along with their classmates, carried with them a silent connection to Miss Whitmore, a bond that transcended the ordinary. They spoke of her not as a ghost, but as a presence, an invisible guide that encouraged them to learn, to grow, and to care for one another. Letters they wrote to her, kept as diaries and memories, were filled with gratitude, questions, and sometimes the quiet wonder of talking to someone who could no longer respond in words but seemed always to hear. The town itself became a repository of stories. Mothers would recount how they sometimes heard a soft hum of a familiar tune when the wind rattled their windows. Fathers spoke of fleeting glimpses of movement in the schoolhouse corridors, a shadow that vanished when approached. Even the mayor, a man of logic and reason, admitted privately that the photograph had changed the town in ways he could not explain. Glenridge was no longer merely a place of daily routine. It had become a living memory, a community held together by both the living and the echo of one who had passed. As the legend grew, so too did the emotional weight of the story. Families began to understand that Miss Whitmore had become more than a teacher. She had become a guardian of the town's collective memory, a silent witness to their lives, and a symbol of the enduring power of care, guidance, and love. Even skeptics found themselves softened, recalling moments when they had felt her presence, when a subtle intuition or a fleeting comfort seemed to come from beyond the veil of ordinary life. By the spring of 1915, the photograph had taken on an almost sacred quality. Children who had been in the class would gather around it during visits to the schoolhouse, pointing out themselves and their classmates, sharing stories of lessons and laughter, and remembering the teacher who had guided them with patience, wisdom, and unwavering care. For many, it was a reminder that death does not always mean absence, that the bonds we form can reach beyond the limitations of flesh and time, and that sometimes a single image can capture something far greater than mere appearance. It can capture essence, presence, and enduring love. In these quiet, reflective moments, the people of Glenridge began to see the photograph not as a source of fear, but as a gift, a glimpse of continuity, a connection to the past, and a testament to the profound impact of one remarkable woman. Miss Whitmore's life, though cut short, continued to influence generations, and the children she had taught carried her lessons, both academic and moral, into the wider world, ensuring that her presence, though invisible, would never truly fade. Years passed in Glenridge, and the town slowly settled into the rhythm of daily life, though the memory of the 1914 school photograph lingered like a quiet echo through its streets. The children who had been photographed grew older, carrying with them not just the ordinary lessons of arithmetic, reading, and history, but a deeper, ineffable understanding of presence, loss, and memory. Clara Thompson became a teacher herself, inspired by the gentle guidance she had received from Miss Whitmore. She often spoke of her former teacher, not as a figure of fear or legend, but as a symbol of care, patience, and unwavering commitment. The photograph remained carefully preserved in the Glenridge School, framed in polished oak and protected behind glass. Families would come to visit, sometimes decades later, pointing out their ancestors among the children, marveling at the serene figure of Miss Whitmore at the center. Each time someone gazed upon the photograph, they felt that familiar combination of warmth and wonder, the sense that a life lived with dedication and love could transcend even death, leaving a lasting impression upon everyone it touched. Historians and photographers continued to study the image over the decades. They debated technical explanations, theories of early photographic manipulation, and even rare natural phenomena that might have caused such an unusual result. Yet none could fully account for the calm, lifelike presence of Miss Whitmore in the photograph taken after her death. For Glenridge, the photograph was less about science and more about memory and meaning. It was a symbol of the community's connection to its past, a reminder that history is not merely the record of events, but also the enduring imprint of lives lived with care and purpose. As the town grew and modernized, the story of Miss Whitmore's photograph became woven into local folklore. Parents would recount it to their children, not as a tale to frighten, but as a lesson in remembrance and respect. Teachers would occasionally mention her name in classrooms, reminding students that the people who guide them, even if only for a brief time, leave marks that can last a lifetime. And those who had been in the photograph, now adults with children and grandchildren of their own, kept her memory alive, telling stories of the gentle teacher whose presence lingered far longer than anyone could have expected. Clara Thompson, now an elderly woman herself, would often sit in her small home overlooking the red brick schoolhouse, remembering the shock and awe she had felt when she first saw the photograph. She recalled the initial fear, the whispers among the children, the questions that no one could answer. And yet, with the passage of time, those feelings transformed into something else: gratitude. Gratitude for having known someone who cared so deeply, whose presence was so profoundly felt that even death could not erase it. She would look at the photograph, now faded slightly with age, and smile, sensing that Miss Whitmore's guidance and love were still with her in every lesson she taught, in every child she nurtured, in every quiet act of care she performed. Even outside Glenridge, the story found its way into history books, newspapers, and scholarly articles. It was cited as one of the most remarkable examples of early 20th century photography, intersecting with human memory and emotion. Students of history marveled not just at the technical aspects of the photograph, but at the emotional resonance it carried, proof that the past and the people who lived it can remain vividly alive in the collective consciousness long after they have passed. For the townspeople, the photograph remained a treasured artifact, a quiet monument to the life of a remarkable woman who had touched so many. Visitors would often remark on the haunting quality of the image, noting how Miss Whitmore's eyes seemed to follow them, calm and steady, as if she were still watching over the children of Glenridge. And in a way, she was. Through memory, through story, and through the photograph itself, Margaret Whitmore continued to guide, protect, and inspire, her presence a gentle reminder that love, care, and devotion can leave an imprint that no passage of time or even death can erase. In the end, the 1914 school photograph was more than an image. It was a story, a lesson, a connection across generations. It reminded Glenridge and the wider world that life, though fleeting, leaves marks that endure, that a single person committed to kindness, guidance, and care can influence countless others, and that sometimes history presents moments of mystery that teach us to honor the past, cherish the present, and never forget those who shaped our lives. And so, in Glenridge, the story of the teacher who had already died but appeared in a photograph lived on. It lived in the hearts of the children who had known her, in the memory of the town, in the quiet wonder of visitors, and in the enduring photograph that captured a life so vivid, so deeply felt, that even death could not take it away. It was a legacy of love, devotion, and the haunting beauty of human presence, a story that would echo through the ages, timeless and unforgettable.